We are the Keller ISD group, and this is our equity audit. I am Zach Axtell.
I'm Ashley Warren.
I'm Lizzie Hernandez.
I'm Mackenzie Kinder.
And I'm Emily Bailey.
Wonderful. So the first thing that I looked up within the Keller ISD is I went ahead and I looked at the district website. So when I looked at it, it looked like really organized and like it had this persona of like it was professional. But I know because of Emily, because she was like from Keller ISD, that's not exactly the reputation they give off. So additionally within like the website, I would say that I found a lot of things were included, like some history, demographics, calendars, departments, transportation, stuff like that. But obviously within the website, there were things such as like the achievement gap within the white and black students excluded because it obviously has a negative connotation. Additionally, into leaving like the history of segregation out, that was like really hard for me to find specifically within Keller ISD. But Emily, I know you looked in more of like percentages regarding the achievement gap.
Yes, I did find on the miseducation source, the achievement gap, their Black students are on average 1.5 grades behind white students. And then white students are also 1.3 times more likely to be enrolled in at least one AP class. And also the gifted and talented program in the district is 67% white. So there's definitely some discrepancies that I found in there.
So, growing up in Keller ISD, did you see these kind of discrepancies? Was it something you noticed in the school, or was it something that nobody really talked about, you didn't notice?
No one really talked about it. I didn't notice it. I know that I didn't go to one of the more like white dominated schools. That one is more Keller High School. So I went to Central, and then we had more of a diverse population. So like I said, I didn't notice things like that. But I know for sure like Keller High School definitely shows a lot more of those discrepancies than any of the 3 other high schools in the district.
I also looked at the history of like segregation and like when it happened and stuff like that. So Keller ISD was founded in 1911, and it was hard to specifically find information regarding like Keller ISD. But specifically the information I'm about to say comes from schools that were in Keller ISD, but just in different cities. So within Keller ISD, there were schools located in like Fort Worth, South Lake, or Westlake, just to name a few. With the history of segregation, they were separated. They weren't separated up until the court case of Flax versus Potts. And this came after Brown versus Board of Education, which occurred obviously in 1954. But many school districts still were segregated due to like not wanting to. So it officially in 1962, the Fort Worth, still part of Keller ISD, was forced to desegregate because of the case where Flax ultimately won, forcing the schools to integrate. So that's what I found on segregation. I don't know if anybody else found additional information.
I really had trouble finding anything. Sorry.
Good.
You can go ahead.
So what I was looking at was the geography of Keller, and the type of communities that are in Keller ISD and that surround it. So the majority of the community in Keller ISD is predominantly white, and that's with 80% or more of white families. I also found that the communities surrounding Keller ISD are also predominantly white, with 80% or more of white families. Some of the areas around Keller, more like getting towards into Fort Worth, are a little bit more diverse, with 20 to 60% of minorities or non-white communities surrounding Keller ISD. So that could be something too, with there not being a lot of communities around Keller. In Keller, it's more predominantly white areas.
Yeah, I also found that obviously whether illegally integrated, the district is over 50% white. So thus it still has like some sort of like integration issues, obviously, because it is predominantly white. But yeah, I also found stuff like that.
I also know there is like housing and income segregation present, even if it is integrated. And I noticed this when we did that activity in class, when we had to like find a house under 500,000 or whatever the number was. I looked in like my old school district just to see. And I know that in a lot of the different high schools, like Keller High School is like old money, richer white families that live in like really nice old homes. And then like the other high schools, it's just different based on high school and where you live in the city. Depending on your high school, it's harder to find a more affordable home. So I definitely noticed some discrepancies and like housing segregation with that.
Emily, I have a question for you. Growing up in the Keller ISD community, was there a certain, not necessarily stigma, but when you look at the different schools of the Keller ISD, you know, you said Keller High was the old money. I believe you said you went to Central, correct? Was there a kind of different like viewpoint of these schools? Was Keller viewed as, or Keller High viewed as necessarily better, or were they all kind of equal? Like, what was the dynamic in the district?
I know that like Keller and Central, my school, were the biggest rivalries, like football games, stuff like that. I know that a lot of people knew that Keller had more like richer students. And I know Fossil Ridge High School is the most diverse in the district, which a lot of people had like a negative connotation to that school just because of that. And then there's another high school, Timber, which I don't really know much about Timber. I know it's sort of richer as well, like more students that have more money over there, like Keller, and then Central's like in the middle. But yeah, those are what I knew growing up.
And also speaking on Keller High School, I think we talked about this in our group the first time we met. The whole debacle going on with their mascot and then their dance team. I don't really have a lot of information around that besides it's a kind of offensive term, outdated term for a sports team, and that there has been push to change it. Does anybody have anything to kind of say about that? With them being the Keller High School Indians, and what was their dance team called?
The Indianettes.
Okay.
The dance team. Yeah. And I know there's been petitions like for years since I remember since my freshman year, probably before then, but I know my freshman year I heard about petitions to change their mascot, and they're not doing anything about it. So
Yeah, I even know quite a few parents who have students in Keller ISD, and I know even the parents aren't even happy with the mascot. I know a lot of the students have petitioned to get it changed, and the board just isn't listening.
the board is also like predominantly white. I noticed that as well when I was looking at the website. Predominantly white men on the board, and our superintendent as well was a white man.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's something that I was going to mention that I found in my research was the teacher versus student demographics. Like you were saying, like the people who are in charge of them, in charge of their education, are like seriously lacking to meet the demographic of students. So I think one that really stood out to me was, where is it at? It's 8% Asian, and the teachers that are of Asian descent are only 1.3%. And then with African American students, it's an 8.2% of the population of Keller ISD, while the teachers that are African American are only make up 3.7%. And so there's like a huge discrepancy, and I have all the rest of the statistics going into white. So for instance, white students make up 58.6% of Keller ISD, while the teachers that are white make up 83% of the staff. And so yeah, there's like these huge discrepancies of the student body that they're serving versus the people that are in charge of the education. So that's something that I wanted to mention too when you were talking about the board being mostly white men, and that is definitely shown in the teacher / student demographic.
Also, the admin at schools growing up, predominantly white as well. Administrators, principals, and then teachers as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Kinsey, did you have any more? I know you said you had a bunch of statistics and stuff. Did you have any more statistics that were really eye-opening to you? Anything that you'd like to specifically point out?
Yeah, other than really the teacher versus student demographics, I really focused a lot on that, honestly, because that was like a huge thing to me that like, yeah, these people, these students aren't seeing people who look like them or who are the same descent as them. And yeah, are really lacking that connection with their teachers. Another thing that I looked into was the STAR performance based on demographics. So yeah, I noticed that the subpopulations are performing more in the lower categories, while the white population of students are dominating the sections of meeting grade level or going higher. So how it kind of had it set up was by each grade, and then it had almost meeting the grade level, and then it had meeting the grade level, and then it had basically exceeding the grade level. And you saw a huge decrease for like subpopulations, so like African American students, Asian students, things like that. You saw a huge decrease from the first section to the last. So yeah, they made up most of our section of almost meeting grade level on the STAR, while white students made up a large portion of exceeding the grade level when talking about the STAR test. And so that was something that really stood out to me. For instance, when talking about third grade reading STAR test, the white population of students have a higher percentage of meeting or exceeding grade level than any other subpopulations. So yeah, so there are multiple areas where some subpopulations are equal, if not higher than white students, but that is not the case in most of the data that I looked at.
So each student, I've found that the total revenue collected is 384,267,000. They get federal, which is about they get federal, local, and state. So each year they spend about $10,000 on each student. The overall budget of the district is the 300 million. The district gets the majority of its funds from the federal government and then local and state governments. And it divides its money into instruction, then student, staff support, administration, operations, and then food services. I was kind of surprised that food services was one of the lower things that they spend money on, just because it is so important too. And there are so many kids that are food deprived. So
I saw on the website though, that's interesting because I saw it was like you can have free lunch. So that should kind of show you how much money they have, that's a low priority, but they literally offer free lunch.
right.
That's interesting.
Right. And I'm pretty sure right now Keller ISD is doing free lunches for elementary and middle school during like the pandemic time.
Yeah, they did start that when I was still there my senior year and COVID started. They were offering free lunches to anyone, regardless of income or anything. You just go to one of the different like drop-off places and you could just get a free lunch. They were also doing dinner at one point. So they were really good about that, like during COVID. I don't know if they're still doing as much, but they were doing a lot during COVID for families.
Yeah. Yeah, I was still kind of shocked too about how much money is spent per student. I felt like that was kind of a lot. I know that sounds weird to say, but it's like they're using a lot. And I'm like, well, where's this money at? If you're spending that much money on each student, it seems like they should have different results than what they're getting.
So we're kind of running out of time here because we do have the time constraint with the podcast and stuff. But does anybody have any last closing thoughts? We've kind of established that Keller ISD does have some issues. We also, after we're all done talking, we do have a short interview with a teacher from Keller ISD, which highlights some more of the inequality and the inequity that happens in Keller. Does anybody have any last closing thoughts?
Yeah, the only other thing that I wanted to mention that I feel like is a really big part of Keller ISD is the disciplinary proportion for subpopulation. So talking about discipline and what that looks like, so when I was looking at this statistics, it was like, at first I was like, oh, like this is actually pretty good because, like, for instance, 388 of white students experienced out of school suspension, while 218 African American students experienced the same out of school suspension. And so I'm like, okay, those are pretty close. But then when you start looking into the demographics of the school, only 8.2% of African American students make up the population, while white students are 58.6%. And so, those are 388 and 218 are not very far apart. And so you're talking about a large portion of African American students being out of school suspended, while a very small proportion of white students experiencing the same thing. So that was just something that I wanted to mention, because at first I was like, okay, those aren't very far apart. And then when you look at the actual statistics of it, it actually is a huge thing in Keller ISD. So.
Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
shocking.
Oh, sorry. I noticed that on one of my sources as well. It listed segregation within the district as medium, which obviously shows that there are a lot of inequalities within the district that goes along with those discrepancies as well. So.
All right, well, thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the interview with the teacher. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Candace Draper, a 12th grade English teacher from Keller ISD. All right, so she is on the equity committee at Central High School. What would you say some of the most consistent inequities in the school are?
In the school or the district?
Either.
As an AP teacher, there's definitely a discrepancy between students of color and white students taking upper level courses. In particular, Black students, it's not a match between the percentage of Black students that we have and the percentage of students taking upper level courses. And then in terms of discipline, that's data that we've looked at. And there are some discrepancies there. Now, they're not terrible. I say they're not terrible. Any discrepancies are bad, but they're not as high as some districts surrounding us. But there again is discrepancies between the student of color population, particularly Black students and Latino students, and the amount of discipline that they're receiving. And so let's say that we have 9% of our student population at Central is Black, but they are 14% of our disciplinary cases. And so there's that discrepancy there, and we want to lower that 14%.
All right, and then as a member of the equity committee, have you or the committee as a whole faced any backlash from parents or the district?
Parents, yes, especially when the CRT, air quotes added here, came into the news cycle and they accused us of teaching that. Our student group, it was called the Student Anti-Racism Coalition, SARC, and Southlake had its own anti-racism coalition, and they, because they did no research, confused those two groups and said that we were bringing in Southlake to integrate CRT into Keller ISD. And so we had to go, and we had student officers go and make a statement at board meetings saying that though we have the same goals as that group, we're not associated with that group. We ended up having to change the name so that we could disassociate. So we changed it to Student Powered Anti-Racism Coalition, so it's Spark now. But we had parents complaining about the trainings that we gave teachers at the beginning of the year, which was requested by admin. Our administration's actually been very supportive. And the district lawyer has been very supportive of us because we've chatted with her a couple times, in particular about the CRT and the new bill that was passed by the Texas legislature about what we can and can't read. And they've been big advocates for us. So frankly, the district's been supportive. It's just the parents that we've gotten some pushback from.